Some people say demographics is destiny. In some ways they are absolutely right, but in most ways they're wrong. Welcome to Geopolitics with Tyberius D, where today we're going to be talking about where we get it right, where we get it wrong, what today says, and what tomorrow is coming. My name is Tyberius D, and I studied in economics and political science. My claim to fame is kind of talking about geopolitics on Twitch. I'm a huge fan of people like Peter Zion and George Friedman and the like, and it's been an absolute pleasure to do this kind of thing, but today we're going to be talking about demographics. If you were interested in generations, that was our last video we did, and that's definitely up on the channel. But I don't really want to break all this down and have a nice chat with you guys about where we are and where everything is coming. So, this is Egypt, and this is what we think of as normal throughout pretty much all of human history. You would have some population bumps here and then. You notice that it's a pyramid, kind of, if you actually put males on one side, females on the other. That's why they used to call them population pyramids, but I just put them all on the side there because we can talk about some things, like the sex imbalance. We'll get to there. Overall, I want to just make this out to be very clear, is that normally this is what we see throughout most of history. And this is the world that we used to know. Now, we're definitely going to get into the used to know part. But you'd have, every now and again something would happen. You'd have a few years of lower birth rate. You can see that here for the 25 to 29 segment. But overall, general population growth, population increases, just fewer people as you get older. That's just most of human history. And the reasons for that is twofold. Number one, high birth rates, particularly before urbanization. You get into families that have 4 to 6 to some places even 8 children per family. Holy crap. But then you have also life-saving medications, procedures, which largely come within the last century or so. That really cut down the death rate from like disease and just general mortality. And so places like Egypt actually aren't as developed as some people think that they are. So the mortality is definitely there. However, I want to make it very clear, at least in Egypt's case, they've had a huge population spike from fertility. I think they're one of the highest in the developing world, as we like to call it. I think they're still at 1 or 6 kids per every family. So, yeah, plenty of population growth. But I wasn't actually going to talk about this, but one of the people in my chat brought it up. The imbalances between the sexes. You'll notice that pretty much when you're younger, there's always more boys than girls, but as you get older, there's more women than men. That's twofold. One is a weird thing in human fertility, where basically the more boys that you see within in a society that are born between women, either one or two things is happening. When it comes to human fertility, for some reason, men implant better than women into the uterine wall, depending on how well society is doing. And it's weird. We've not figured out exactly what the right metrics are, but we definitely noticed a strong correlation between the balance of male to female births and how well, like, economically, socially, a society is doing. That's meta as hell, and that could be its own presentation. All I'm simply going to say in regards to that is that we know it's there, but we don't know what the exact correlative links are or what triggers it. And so if you actually see a society that has more females being born than males, that's generally a good sign that society is either about to collapse or is in the process of having collapse. We've seen that before in history. It's just, usually it's not very good. And so, like, that's not a hit on women or anything. It's just, it's weird. We actually have data supporting that. Because of male mortality, though, because men are, most societies, whether you say they're patriarchal or whether it's just the normal social sexual breakdowns in labor, is that men have a significant higher mortality than women in the workforce and just in general everyday life. And so when you break it down, men and women can live to about the same age, but almost everywhere across the world, men die at a precipitously higher rate, and so their average mortality is about 5 years younger. So, when you get that in the pyramid, even if you have a normal, healthy society, it has a couple more dudes than they do women. And right now, the trend's about 106, by the way. Some get up to about 120, but those are places like India and China, and that looks like it's infanticide, which was the other thing I didn't cover. There are places that do female infanticide because they're very patriarchal. Sucks, but... Anyway, moving on, is that general mortality makes this a pyramid to some degree, or throughout most of human history, and men will just die quicker than the women will. So this is how you get this normally. Talking about how I look at this from the more economic point of view, economics is actually not what people think it is. It's not this weird, nebulous conclusion of all these different people. There's some key factors here. Geography being one and demography being the other, and this is the demography that I look at that explains the world in the way you need to know. You have children at the bottom, children who are coming up into the society writ large. They're fine. They don't technically account, but they kind of just fall into the young adults category, because the young adults are are the parents of a society. They are, in their 20s to 40s, or basically 20 to 40, right? These are the people who are buying their first home or buying homes. They're buying cars. They're smoking pot. They're doing all the things, right? College degrees, kids, anything that you can do to try to, move up in the world, I guess, if you want to put it that way. These are what they are doing. They're just doing their natural age group role. But there's a problem with that, and the reason I have these guys in red on this particular graph is that they're always operating in the red. You have to take loan after loan after loan because your income is low, because you're starting your career or you're trying to find it, but you don't have the savings, the wealth, the acquisition ability that you would have as being older. We'll get there in a second as it is. But you're starting your career, you're starting all this, so it's very kind of low income, high output. You are consuming, and you do your job in that. Without these people, the economy goes to hell. You need people who are going to buy the goods, products, and services, and so children and young adults basically form a super extension of each other in the regards that the young adults raise the children. If you have a lot of children, you've got a lot of demand that supports into the young adults, and so you have a healthy, economically prosperous and growing society on the consumption base. Let's talk about the supply base on the other side of that. Elders don't fall into this exclusively, but they do help a little, and there's some weird knickknacks here. But senior workers are where this all breaks down, and these graphs do move a little bit depending on if you're a developed nation or an undeveloped nation. Generally, if you're an undeveloped nation, we'll put children all the way up to 20. And then you'll have your young workers go up to about 45. And you can pretty much hit this by whatever a country has its retirement age at. If it's a country that has a retirement age of 60 or around there, you're probably either developing or undeveloped. And if you have it at 65 or higher, that probably means you're a more wealthy, medically induced society. And so those do move a little bit, but that I just wanted to touch that. Anyway, senior workers. Senior workers are people who are kind of going into their midlife, but it's really kind of their actual late life, in the regards that these are people who are working, who are incredibly beneficial to the society in terms of their productivity, because you're not that guy who just got onto the floor plan in the last couple years. You're the guy that's been doing it for 10 or 20 years, hopefully, if you have a career. And so your productivity is higher, your knowledge base is higher, your ability to basically assert yourself is extremely high. And that's a good thing for these people because they need it, because the kids are moving out. You are now able to work for yourself more than you ever have in your life, and now you're accruing wealth. And the thing about that wealth is that while it's a wonderful thing, we all know what it's actually here for. It's for retirement. It's for your elder years if you happen to have them. And to be part of that system is that you're basically saving up for the day that you jump into the final category. To do that, you need to have a functional capital base, and this is where that comes from. These people have a lot of money that they're getting in because they've developed their careers and their potentiality, but they don't have the expenses that they used to have because either they can pay for the car more outright or they can put bigger down payments, what have you. Their inflows are significantly better than their outflows. It's a complete reverse, which is why I have them in green on this. This is the capital base of any society. This is where you get your loans from. This is where you get your tax base from, all of that. Your senior workers. And so these guys are really important overall. And then, of course, once you get to your elders, they actually are a little bit more like consumption, but I have them in black because you're just kind of punching your ticket, or you're waiting to punch your ticket. And it's really sad and really morbid, but once you hit your retirement age in your society, you're basically there because you're physically impaired. Obviously there's some people that can work into their 80s, and you can all probably cite that, but basically decrepitization and frailty really start creeping in, depending on what your medical options are, around 60 to 65. But after that, you just really can't participate in the workforce like you used to, particularly if it's anything physical. And mental is also within question too. Just look at some of y'all elected leaders. Anyway, so yeah, age is huge, and I don't like to be ageist with this, but when it just comes down to it, there are incredibly strong correlations with where people are as an age and how they behave in their demography, and so that is incredibly important, because you'll notice that this isn't normal anymore. This is a high growth, high energy system that we're looking at in Egypt, where you can have growth on growth on growth, and the only limiting factor in this economy so it doesn't absolutely explode is capital, because the senior workers are just at nowhere near the amount that they need to be to supply the young people with the amount of capital. And so this is where you get an environment where you see 10% interest rates or more, is that this high growth, high octane economy just doesn't tend to have the capital base to support it. And so it has slower growth, it has higher interest rates, but those people who are saving for retirement can do so in the big way. And that it works. The thing is that the less slanted this pyramid is that the more that you can facilitate growth and consumption at the same time. But that's kind of a rarity. So now that I've explained all of this, I want to put a disclaimer in for the video. We're going to try to make sure that we get a recording out of this. That when we do the recording, we put some timestamps in for y'all. We're going to take a trip around the world for a bit. We're going to look at each kind of general area, explain, hey, look, this is where the demography is for this area, where they went from normal, and how bad is it. We're going to do that, and then we're going to come back home to the United States, and we're going to talk about that. Okay, so where we left off was we were talking about how the rest of the world hasn't gone the way that this is that we've kind of moved into something else. And so we're going to take a quick trip around the world and show you where we all kind of gone. So first is first, Europe. This is the European Union writ large. This is obviously with Britain now gone, otherwise it'd be about 500 million people. Europe is becoming an old folks' home very quickly. Basically, whether you want to call it just the land of the white people or whatever, Europe has had a population degrowth. And there's twofold in that one. You are talking about countries in this graph like Poland and Eastern Europe, which we are going to separate out. But even if you look at the entirety writ large, most of these countries have a baby boom generation, but they just don't have kids. And most of this is actually the best looking of the demography, is when you hedge all of Europe together. Because when you get into some of these countries writ large, just on their individual level, it's a spike and then it's dead. And so Europe together actually has I'm not going to say it's a healthy demography. You're probably looking at a 40% population drop within Europe over the next 40 years. Not kidding. But with that is going to come a lot of capital and a lot of ways to kind of reinvent yourself before Europe has to figure out how to go a new direction. So if they do it now, they can afford it. If not, they're screwed. Let's talk about each individual country, kind of give you a little bit where I'm just going to hit a few. Germany is the quintessential example of this. Plenty of people between 55 and 65, but they're all are basically 50 and 65. They're all going to be retiring here within the next 10 years. And once that happens, you're going to have Germany, which has been incredibly capital rich, could literally just like wave their finger and bail out Greece. And Germany's going to be heavily indebted. So Germany, right now, is going to have to figure out how to reinvent itself in a world where it has as many retirees as it does people who are working. And that's going to be hard because no one's been here before, except maybe Japan, which we'll get to that later. Germany is not far from it. And so the Germany that we think of, highly productive, incredibly rich, it's all gone in 10 years. Because that's what this group is. This is why Germany can export like 50% of its gross domestic product, is that you've got these people who are in the highest part of their productivity in their lives, 50 to 60. They know what they're doing, they're equipped, they have a lot of income. Cool, we're going to sell it all over Europe. You'll even sell made in Germany stuff all the way across the globe, and they do. That brings them a huge amount of productivity and tax base, but it's all gone in 10 years. And they have no one to take their place because the demographics that are just below them, it takes almost an entire 20-year segment to replace what they're going to lose in a 10-year segment. So, not that they're super screwed, but as you can see, their population slumped off twice. Not just once, but twice. Whether they can rebound that or not, different conversation, but we're just going to have to wait and see. Italy kind of doing the same thing, except they've had just a stripe drop, or they had a rapid growth and then a rapid drop off. Italy doesn't have any hope of really stabilizing at all. They're demographically beyond the point of repair. Italy is going to have a massive conversation on what you do with old people here in about 15 to 20 years. They're about 5 years behind the Germans, but where the Germans have kind of stabilized their population degrowth to some degree, where they can kind of step down, the Italians haven't. They are just dropping like rocks, and Italy is going to have to figure out how to run a society where you have more retirees than working people here in about 15 years. Good luck! Spain, kind of a little bit of both. They having a secondary collapse, but at least they have a plateau that they can kind of get into. This group of people who is just now entering their 20s is going to be able to kind of give Spain some economic legs because it is actually a population growth again. They're going to be capital flooded because of their predecessors, but this is an environment where if you want to have the ingenuity of young people paired with high capital from the old people, Spain can reinvent itself. And it's about time that it does. Because Spain is kind of I'll just say it, they are the most regressive society within Western Europe, and I'm not talking about in like social conservatism. I'm talking about Spain in the regards of that their economic prowess, their economic aptitude, really kind of sucks because it's one of the most super hierarchical, like neo-feudal things that you can get within Europe. It's incredibly bad how much proportions between like rich and poor and like class status that there's there, and if Spain wants to get past that, this is the time that they're going to need to do that. The only good country in all of Europe right now is actually France. I'm not sure if that's immigration or what have you, because France is actually has a constitutional provision to where you can't collect ethnic data. So how much of this is North African immigration and their children versus how much of this is that people that are quote-unquote ethnically French, we don't know. But this is stable. It's a little bit wishy-washy, but if you can turn this into a chimney, which they largely have, where it's just, you get up to about 75 and then you start dying like crazy, that works. That can work in a new world. It's going to be finicky. You're going to have really low interest rates. You're going to have some issues with that. But it's going to be incredibly capital rich. And so I'll put it in this regard. If this is the future that humanity wants to go down or can go down, this is actually going to work out really well for France, and particularly any nation that looks like that. I'll give you a hint. There's one coming. A country that has a significant population that can do the consumption base that is equal to the capital base, that capital can now not only work within the society proper and fuel its capital needs and desires very well, it can actually put its weight out around it. It can geopolitically not expand, but it can geopolitically influence people with the wealth. And so, in the same way that the Germans were able to force austerity on freaking everybody, France is going to be able to do this long term. The only question is that, can France reinvent itself? Because it's one of the most economically screwy nations in Europe. France, I'm sorry. I love you guys, but you all need to stop putting your eggs in every basket. Like, your entire history is like, oh, we can have a navy and an army? Cool, let's do both. And then you get your navy cracked by the British and your army cracked by the Germans. Like, pick a lane, figure out what you want to do, and do it well, and you will succeed beyond every measure. You don't have to do one thing well. You can do about 3 of them. You have every capacity to go in a different direction. Just pick a few. Focus. Anyway, so that covers Western Europe. Let's do Eastern Europe. Right. So this is the borders of the Soviet Union in the current day. You can see that we'll kind of talk about Eastern Europe as far as the Russian frontier versus what is Poland and the Baltics and whatever. This is actually, again, the healthiest demography in this setup, because when you put them all together, their little nooks and crannies screw up. But you can see that this is an area that has a serious issue. And by the way, we're really not convinced that the data from the 25-year-olds and under is 100% sound, particularly from the Russian Federation. So take this with a pinch of salt. If they have demographically recovered or stabilized at all, they're still... that's not I'm sorry, that very well may not be possible, for one, but 2 is that they probably just goofed it up with this big old war. So the CIS, former Confederation of Independent States, aka the former Soviet Union, this is what this looks like, all 15 nations. And yeah, got plenty of people in their 30s, but everything else kind of chopped off after the collapse of the Soviet Union. This looks better than it is. I'll put it this way when it comes to the bottom of this. It looks like they're trying to stabilize and are stabilizing, but that's pretty much everybody put together. So let's break that down a little bit. Here's Russia. The big reason that the data in question on Russia is that we got different numbers at different points. About 10 years ago, this part with 25 and under was just straight flat, and then all of a sudden they found like 8 million kids, according to a colleague of mine. So that might not be sound, and generally he's been right. So we'll see if the Russians actually have the children that they do. If anyone's kind of wondering why I was a little bit more hesitant on pulling the trigger on the Russians were going to invade, look at this demography. It made sense 10 years ago, when you had this huge population base which would have been in their 20s. So you could have walked into Kiev or whatever, and you could have had 1.5 million men do it. Made sense. I'm surprised they didn't do it then. I thought they would. The fact they do it in 2022, where this demography is in the core, worst part they could have had, at least according to this data, it's in the absolute core, worst time they could have pulled the trigger on this, shows me that the Russians aren't doing this with an incredible amount of sound strategic mind. Either they are absolutely so desperate that they don't feel like they have any other option, which is very possible, or 2, the people who are in charge aren't nearly as smart as they think that they are. Because if you've got a population base and your entire history is throw as many dudes as you possibly can at the problem to break it, because I'll talk about that here in a second, Russia has kind of just failed to do that in this regard, and they failed to do it when they could have. To wrap up that last point, though, Russia is 142 million people. While all those aren't Russian, about 78% of them are. So it's the most populous country within Europe, and they've literally got the EU4 quantity meme down. It's just literally throw more dudes at everybody else, because only the Germans and the Turks, all united, has a population base that can even remotely rival that. Russia is incredibly powerful within Eastern Europe. And the fact that they're performing so absolutely dog-awfully is impressive, to say the least. But they're not using anything that they even used in the past that really made them different. So, yeah. Long story short, the Russians are in a really big hole. 100 million Russians still live within the European part of Europe. It's incredibly populous, even with this kind of crappy demography. The question is how many of these people are actually Russian? And at least from the data that we're getting, if there is a population spike, 90% of them aren't Russian. They're going to be Tartars and Kazakhs and all the other peoples that are within the empire. So, yeah. Russia probably isn't nearly as good as it looks. Ukraine kind of has the same problem. Ukrainians are actually a little bit better at their data keeping. There's still issues there. The problem is that this was 43 million people, or almost 44 million people, and now they're down into the 30 millions. The refugees sent the better part of 7 million screaming out of the country. There's now more people coming back into the country than are leaving it because Ukraine has been able to hold out so well. But they have to win. And if they don't win, Ukraine is pretty much gone as a country. The Russians will lead this country into absurdity. So yeah, fun. Poland trying to do the best that they can, and they have largely, at least looks like they will stabilize. But they're still a country that's going to lose the better part of 40% of their population over the next 40 years. They're younger, they're just a little bit older than me from the polls, because these are people who were born in the late 80s, so they have like this really big early millennial generation within Poland, and they're going to be important for a while. And so the Poles really want to be somebody right now in Europe. Now's the time where they can do it, because they're going to have a consumption base that's slowly growing into a capital base. Poland can do some reformations under that, but we're going to have to see if that consumption demographic below them is going to be able to stabilize into something that really works for them. Poland, I'll put it this way, Poland having the right-wing crazy-ass government that it does right now is cringe to some degree, but I'll put it very strictly. If they have an actual population conversation to where they're like, no, we need to encourage citizen growth, which is a very conservative thing within Europe right now and kind of fits to this, Poland can actually demographically stabilize, and they're the most likely country to do so. I'm never going to say that they're going to be as strong, as powerful, and capable as like Germany or Russia, but Eastern Europe, Poland is not the guy to win, but they're the guy that can do best in this environment if they play their cards right. Everyone else has a lot more problems, but this is not counting energy and whatever. But that wraps up Eastern Europe for us. We're going to move over into East Asia, actually. And holy crap! Japan is the oldest society in human history. The average age of a Japanese person is like 56. They had a population surge post World War II. They had a baby boomer, then like a late baby boomer, then an early millennial a jump. But after that, their population went to hell. And the reason that Japan has been in a rolling recession for the better part of the last 30 years is because these people just got too old really quick. And so while you have this demography in where you should have saw some level of growth in the 1990s, Japan basically doubled in on that first group. And so by the time the second group had come out, they had over-rigged the credit system in Japan to such a degree that that second thrust of people never got their opportunity to really succeed. So Japan's kind of screwed. They already are the world's oldest nation by far, and you're probably looking at their population over the next 40 years dropping by not 40%, but by 55. That might not actually be a bad thing, though, because you're talking about a place that is literally the size of California, that has 125 million people. So if you pulled that down to about you pull that down to 60 or maybe 55 million instead, that is a far more manageable population base to handle. But Japan has got to get everything fixed. Their demography is just collapsing. Their dating scene is terrible. Their economics are terrible. Like, Japan just needs a full-on overhaul. So good luck. South Korea. North Korea and South Korea actually look kind of healthy, but the problem is that North Korea has kind of a stable population growth, but they're all starving, so I didn't really put them in here. South Korea did really well for about 30, 40 years there. Really kind of came into its own. But the last 15 to 20 years, people stopped having kids in a really big way. And there's a couple of reasons why that might be the case. But if Korea continues on this trend, they're going to see 50 to 55% of their population collapse, which again is one of the most populated places of the planet. And if that does happen, you're going to have resource strain a lot more manageable within Korea big issue is that you really just need that many people to combat threats like Japan and China if you're going to be geopolitically sound. Yeah, they really need to get the peninsula united, and they need to stabilize their demography and their economic structure because, don't get me wrong, Samsung is massive, but it's very corporocratic over there, and that's only going to work for so long. Yeah, let's go to China, everyone's favorite. If anyone thought that China's going to be the next superpower, I promise you they won't. The long and the short is that one-child policy did a massive amount of damage. While you can get into some of the nitty and the gritty here with China, is that they're going to have at least a 30% decline in their population over the next 40 years. One child was problematic for two reasons. One, it literally just was a plan to half your population, which made some sense because you literally are talking about the most populous country on the planet, and it's 5 times the population of the United States, or almost, right? And about the same size. So, yeah, like, managing that population looks scary. Particularly in the fact that you have to rely on everybody else for all the things you need. Like, most of the Chinese economy is not sourced domestically. They have to import everything and then, export the finished products. That's the Chinese economic model. And you can do that with this worker base. The problem is that they don't even play economics in the way that everybody else does. They kind of did the Japanese thing where they overcredit everything and then they just roll it until it breaks. And so China probably breaks this year, actually. Where that goes, I don't know. They've stabilized their demography according to their data, but then they've admitted it supposedly that this year their data wasn't 100% sound. They may have overcounted their population by 100 million. I don't know. That's just what I'm hearing. I'm not going to make any affirmative claims on it, but I have been told that overall is that it goes with the general trend data as far as wages and productivity that we've seen out of the country, that it actually makes sense that that data is correct. So China might actually have 100 or 1.3 billion people instead of 1.4, making India bigger, more importantly, but also the fact that the Chinese economic miracle may be even far worse than we thought it was going to be, in the regards that we could very much see the end of China very soon, and again, it's very likely that might be just this year. So that's just one of the big things. Speaking of India, India is probably one of the healthiest demographies in the world. It's slumping off, and I want to talk about that. That's called the developing world baby bust, as we've called it, where the developed world had this massive baby surge with the baby boomers, and then they dropped off. The developing world has the millennial baby bust, where you have a bunch of millennials, but then you have no Zoomers. And India is a very strong case for this. That's not a bad thing. India is incredibly overpopulated. It's about 1/3 of the continental United States, maybe a little bit bigger than that. It's got almost 1.4 billion people. In fact, when I revised this data just the other day to bring it up to what the estimate was versus what it ended up actually being, yeah, there was about 20 or 40 million more people than what we thought there was going to be. So yeah, India is exploding. That is obviously going to slow down, and that's something they need to work on. This society is incredibly capital poor. One, because of the incredible amount of growth that they have in population growth, but also that their environment's actually incredibly destructive to capital. And so actually having it to where they can stabilize out would be one of the biggest things India could do to turn the corner in an economic sense. And I actually hope that to some degree they get there. Whether they stabilize this out or they just kind of have a tapering off, both are actually in the interest of India because of how capital intense that geography is. So India could do a lot worse. Indonesia, kind of the same thing. The Zoomer baby bust is here. Had a massive population growth, started industrializing, slowed down, and has gotten to the point where urbanization is making it to where it's actually starting to taper off. If anyone's looking at the Aussies, I'm not going to say they had the same thing, but they kind of had the same thing. They are doing the Anglo thing where they're actually stabilizing their population. Pretty much all the Anglo countries outside of Canada have succeeded in that. So that's an interesting one. Moving to Africa. We'll shotgun this one pretty quickly. Africa is what you saw with Egypt. It is the only place where you're having the vast majority of population growth or on the planet right now. It is kind of unhinged in how fast this is growing. That is probably just going to end up being a bad thing. Africa has an enormous amount of potential, but it needs an incredibly large capital base to make it work because of the environment that Africa is. And that's without the politics, that's without the economic issues that goes on. It's just geographically speaking, it has a problem. So if you're going to see Africa succeed, you actually need them to taper off more than anybody else and kind of get a big capital growth here in 40 years that will really help them. Going like this is an economy that's waiting for industrial burnout. You can't have this level of growth and not just be mired in poverty forever. You have to either be able to adapt into some kind of economic system that will really flood you with capital, or you're kind of hosed. And so whether it's Egypt, whether it's Ethiopia, whether it's Mali, the overall general theme here is that huge population growth, not enough capital to remotely go around, and everybody is mired in extreme poverty. It sucks. I wish the best for I wish the best for Africa, but the reality that looks to me is that Africa is going to start starving because they're not going to have the capital to pay for the food. Yeah, it's going to be bad. Latin America, aka basically everything south of the border, outside of... I didn't put the Caribbean in this one, so if you guys want to hit me for that, you can. Literally, the conversation of the developing world had over again. Most of these countries didn't really start developing until 1990. Into what we call the developing world, or a modern nation state. A lot of these places were some of the poorest in the world, had significant issues, still have significant issues if I'm being completely honest, but they're following the trend. Huge population growth, finally got that tapered off and under control, and now they're slumping back. That's probably not a bad thing for most of Latin America because they have the Africa problem. Huge geographic issues that kind of impede everybody from having lines of communication. The climate eats your capital, and the locomotion eats your capital. So these are societies that actually want to see this tapering. And that may actually prove to be beneficial. Let's break these countries down a little bit because not all of them are following through with this. Argentina is actually probably the healthiest in the developing world writ large. They are still having growth, but they've tapered it off to such a degree to where if they continue on this growth trend, Argentina can achieve relative power status as one of the major powers of the world because they will have a significant population base, significant consumption base, and a significant capital base. And I'll put it this way, I don't know a lot about Argentina, but I know that they are absolutely god-awful at their administration and politics, and if, I'll put it this way, if they can get their head out of their ass in a real political sense, Argentina is the force to be in a new world, if they can get it right. Here's their rival, the Brazilians. Brazil is 4 to 5 times the size of Argentina, and is kind of renowned across the world now as one of the growing powers. There's a problem with that. Argentina has the best geography within South America. Brazil has pretty much the worst, unless you're talking about like Chile. They need a capital base far more than the Argentines do, and while they are probably going to get that, their political system's junked, their banking and economic system's kind of junked, and now they're going to have a populist infusion here with how all their demographics are turning out. Yeah, you're probably going to see a society that is going to bleed its young people to pay for the rich people. If they can figure out how to do the opposite of that, where they keep, the birth rate good, they're primed for power status. But Brazil's politics and economics have just gone out the door. And I'm just going to put it in this particular regard. Brazil going forward is probably going to be worse than what the demography says because they import a lot of fertilizer. And now fertilizer is in massively short supply in the world because of the Russo-Ukrainian war. So we may actually see the Brazilian agricultural economy break next year. Okay, good luck. Bolivia, just starting to make the turn. Really good example of the countries that are catching up. Overall, in general, is that starting to industrialize, starting to stabilize. They have a lot of options ahead of them. but they're going to have to make some choices. Guatemala. Guatemala is one of these countries that has kind of followed through with continuing the developing. The problem with Guatemala is that it's not industrialized in the same way that a lot of these other places have. Guatemala is basically it's a cartel narco state. And there's nothing in the regards of like a modern industrial society that's kind of in here. These population decreases aren't because things are getting better in Guatemala and they're slowing down naturally. It's because everyone's dying. They're either dying or they're leaving. They have the highest homicide rate in the Western Hemisphere, bar nothing. If you can leave, you do. The vast majority of people that are coming up to the American border to immigrate are now Guatemalans or Hondurans. This is a society that is probably going to see state failure soon, to be honest. But let's talk about the good one, Mexico. Believe it or not, immigration from Mexico is actually now negative. There's more people that go to Mexico from the United States. Demographically, they have stabilized. Their economy is doing better. Their political system is actually doing better. Don't get me wrong. There's 1,000 things I can criticize about Mexico. But if you're talking about a society that's trying to do everything right to transform into being a good partner for not only the United States, but just being a stable country in general, Mexico's got a lot of promise. And, you know, a few real anti-corruption campaigns getting rid of people who are part of the narco state, you eliminate that, you partner with the Americans to where you can sizably get the drug trade under control, and Mexico has a very long and bright future ahead of it. I eagerly await to see how Mexico performs. We're about to wrap all this up, and we're going to bring it back to Canada before we come back to the United States. Canada is like Europe in a lot of regards, except they're the exception from the Anglosphere, where you look at the Kiwis, you look at the Aussies, the Americans, and the Brits, which we really haven't brought up anyone except the Aussies. We're all chimneys. Canada is not, because they can't tap the immigration that anybody else can to really get them there without paying everybody to come. Pretty straightforward as it is. Canada is going to slowly sump into being an old folks home. They're going to have the benefits and the problems that come with that. I'll put it this way. Instead of seeing Canada do what the Europeans do, I expect the end of Canada in the 2040s. They'll probably just say, look, we're going to tag on to what is working, and then what is working is the United States. All right, so the United States. Back to the United States, and, well, we never got here. let me redo this. All right, so we're talking about the United States, and the long and the short here is that the United States is probably one of the most healthy and stable demographies in the world right now. While it is a geography that actually prevails in generating capital, is that having, a sizable amount of baby boomers really has made it to where the United States is pretty much the most capital-rich country in society in human history. It has some problems, though. And so I want to move to the next slide to show you that. In the way that I look at this is that it's great that the millennials have a group of young workers that are going to be the consumption base, and we, the millennials, have largely kept the United States out of recession for the last 10 years. But on the other side of that is we're getting older. And so as we get older, we're kind of basically replacing the boomers because there's not enough Gen Xers. Basically what I'm saying is, right now, we are at our peak consumption and capital richness. But in 10 years, we're going to move into a state where we're not. We are going to have a capital shortage as the primary capital generation is Gen X. And we're going to have a labor shortage and a growth shortage as the primary consumption base in the country is going to be the Zoomers. And so if you are already having problems with labor, particularly if you're in low-skill labor, I already know we are seeing the largest increase of low-income labor wages or low-skill labor wages in the United States for the last 2 years, that it's going to continue. The future of labor is not what you think. There is no going back to normal. There is no changing up the way that we do this. You are now going to be fighting for every worker that you have, and that was going to continue as long as the Zoomers and Alpha generation are going to be a slumping generation. I'll put it this way. The data looks like the Zoomers are a shrinking generation. The Alpha generation looks like they're going to grow because they're the millennials kids, and we're expecting a few more of them coming down the years. If that data ends up being true, you don't get back to normal until about 2040, 2045, when the millennials kids are entering the workforce. And that's kids being born today. So yeah, 2045 is when we get back to that, if the data ends up being, the guess ends up being correct. How many kids the millennials have, plus immigration. So yeah, 20 years of a labor shortage and a capital shortage before we get back to where we are today. If you are not ready for that, expect interest rates to go through the roof, expect your wages to go, relatively through the roof, first starting with low income, low skill labor, and it will slowly percolate up as things go on, because basically this is what's happening. The boomers are retiring writ large and they're becoming part of the elder core. Someone has to replace them. Gen X is trying to do that, but there's not enough of them, so millennials are trying to do that. As those jobs and opportunities open up, millennials and Gen X will flood into the mid and high tier of income brackets and quality brackets, and just basically company ownership, viewership, and operations, which leaves the entire bottom completely open, and even parts of like the middle bottom. There's just not enough Zoomers to fill that. So what we are probably going to see, and I'm telling you right now, if you are not prepared for this, or if you're not prepared to mentally put this in your head, if you are a business owner, if you are part of the that community, the future of the United States is going to have workers who are entry level, working and earning as much as middle income salary managers. If you're not prepared for that, get ready for it, because it's coming. You are going to see the vast majority of incomes within the United States, for one reason or another, whether it be politically, economically, or demographically, is going to coalesce, and people are going to be making a lot more of the same, regardless of what position they're in, and particularly where they're going. They're going to fight for it, and either you're going to be paying out the damn nose to keep your middle execs and your high execs paid at a competitive rate, because basically everybody at the bottom is rocketing up, or you're going to have to be willing to pay pretty much everybody a really good wage across the board. So that's the new normal. If you are prepared for that, or you are preparing for that, good job, good luck. If you're not preparing for that, you can probably kiss your business goodbye. I'm willing to stake it out right now. That is probably the future that you're going to see, is that labor is not going to be something you can operate 10% of your budget on, or even like 15%. Following it up, thank you for watching, though. What's coming next? I probably am going to do immigration. I'm debating on that one. We might actually do like generating wealth or inflation or whatever. We're going to be having an inflation chat on the Twitch channel here on Friday. It's going to be a limited panel, so I might do that before or after. I don't know. But I do want to appreciate everyone for being here. I do appreciate everyone for watching, whether you were on Twitch, whether you're watching on YouTube, or what have you. I'm very happy to kind of walk this through and explain it.